Today's passage comes from Genesis chapter 47, and we'll be reading from verses 1 through 10. Genesis chapter 47, we're reading from verses 1 through 10. This is God's word. So Joseph went in and told Pharaoh, "My father and my brothers, with their flocks and herds and all that they possess, have come from the land of Canaan. They're now in the land of Goshen." And from among his brothers he took 5 men and presented them to Pharaoh. Pharaoh said to his brothers, "What is your occupation?" And they said to Pharaoh, "Your servants are shepherds, as our fathers were." They said to Pharaoh, "We have come to sojourn in the land, for there is no pasture for your servants' flocks, for the famine is severe in the land of Canaan. And now please let your servants dwell in the land of Goshen." Then Pharaoh said to Joseph, "Your father and your brothers have come to you. The land of Egypt is before you. Settle your father and your brothers in the best of the land. Let them settle in the land of Goshen. And if you know any able men among them, put them in charge of my livestock." Then Joseph brought in Jacob, his father, and stood before Pharaoh, and Jacob blessed Pharaoh. And Pharaoh said to Jacob, "How many are the days of the years of your life?" And Jacob said to Pharaoh, "The days of the years of my sojourning are 130 years. Few and evil have been the days of the years of my life, and they have not attained to the days of the years of my life, of the life of my fathers in the days of their sojourning." And Jacob blessed Pharaoh and went out from the presence of Pharaoh. This is God's word, and thanks be to God. Friends, do you realize that all of us at one point or another, and perhaps even at this very moment, is seeking something that we believe will basically bless us, something that we believe will complete us, something that we believe will make our lives better. Our lives, if you were to trace the trajectory of it, moves always in the direction of something that we believe will grant us happiness, and that we believe will grant us a sense of purpose, that we believe will grant us a sense of satisfaction. And that for that aim and for that purpose, regardless of what we say, regardless of how we conduct, that is the ultimate goal and the purpose by which and for which we end up living our lives. So friends, before I begin our passage and explaining it today, I want to first throw this question out because it relates to something that we'll be talking about. Where do you think humanity's truest happiness lies? Where do you think your concept and your belief of happiness lies? Attaining what will make you happy? Having what will make you happy? Doing what will make you happy? Achieving what will make you happy? Because if you really try to answer that question, you'll realize that, again, as I alluded to earlier, a lot of our life and where it's moving towards is really focused in towards that direction. What we believe will be satisfying, good, blessing our lives. And for that purpose, we'll be again, after thinking about that, examine the Bible and what it has to say regarding what is the true blessing. What is the true happiness? What is the true thing, the only thing that really gives meaning to our lives? But without further ado, I will now move into today's passage and consider that question with us together. Just to give a brief recap and explain the significance of what was happening prior to this passage. I know it's been 2 weeks and it's already so easily out of our minds. So just to give a brief recap. Remember that Joseph did not want his family to move into the elitist of elites within the Egyptian culture. For one simple reason. He didn't want any of his family to fall under the delusion of wealth or the delusion that the Egyptian nobility and that land is where they were going to ultimately settle. Joseph knew, as a man of God, that the true promises and blessings did not lie within the wealth or prosperity or anything that Egypt can offer, despite its advanced civilization and enormous wealth. In fact, he believed otherwise. Therefore, we were reminded why Jacob decided to tell his brothers, hey, when you're before Pharaoh, introduce yourselves as you are, shepherds, and nothing else. And why did he do that? Because he knew shepherds cannot settle in the mainstream Egyptian society. And he rather wanted to stay in the outskirts of Egyptian society. Why? Because when the time comes for them to go back to the promised land, after God's plan has been sufficiently fulfilled within Egypt, he wanted them to leave Egypt. That they may, and make it easier for them to leave Egypt by putting them on the outskirts of Egyptian land. He again knew, and he did this with one purpose in mind, that a full blessing and the truest blessings that a human being can enjoy does not lie in the things that human hands can reach and grasp, but in the God who is the fount of everlasting life. As such, he instructed his brothers to tell Pharaoh that they are shepherds and have been since their ancestors. And again, this is where we come to today's passage. He knew that doing so would help his family to never become too comfortable with the riches of Egypt, and that they may be ready to seek for a new kingdom. So when the time came for them to introduce themselves, the brothers did tell Pharaoh what Joseph instructed them to do. And that's what we are seeing in the early parts of today's passage. And Pharaoh, after hearing that, admitted his family, Jacob's family, to stay in the land of Goshen, the land of the shepherds. And he even instructs them to take care of his own sheep. And perhaps he's trying to bestow his highest honor and profession he can bestow to shepherds who are living in Egypt. At this point, friends, we can say that the immigration process has panned out rather smoothly. Has it not? Perhaps Pharaoh wanted to bestow greater honor to Jacob's family, and you can see it in the fact that he made them his royal servant, so to speak. But since he's aware of intricacies of Egyptian culture and how despised shepherds were, making them his royal shepherds was perhaps the best that he could do based on the testimonies that the shepherds, that Jacob's brothers has basically given him. Or was it? Was that the best that the Egyptian Pharaoh could ever do for Joseph's brothers? Friends, as I was meditating on this bit of the passage, it's a little bit of a segue, but an important thing that I wanted to kind of go over briefly. I couldn't help but notice how smoothly the immigration process is panning out right now. Whether it be opposition or disagreement from either Pharaoh or the Egyptian royalty, Joseph's immigration plan to move his family into Goshen might have gone wrong at any point. Let's just say, hypothetically speaking, that Pharaoh didn't like their answer because he, for some reason, wanted to bless Joseph's families a lot more. Then it's possible that at that point, Pharaoh could have easily told them, hey, you just keep that between you and me. I'm going to hide the fact that you are shepherds because based on what Joseph has done for my kingdom and for myself, I want to grant you guys an even higher position, an even better land. So why don't you keep that fact a secret? And I'll try to convince the other Egyptian royalty and try to bring you back into the Egyptian main fold. Now, for some of you, that might sound far-fetched, but definitely given the history that human beings have lived and how kingships have actually run, that wasn't actually that uncommon. It was definitely possible for royalties and kings to hide their background and find some kind of justification to put people from quote-unquote poor backgrounds into rich nobility settings. And there might also have been, on the other side, opposition from the Egyptian royalty as well. If they, for some reason, didn't like even these shepherds from foreign lands to become integrated into Egyptian society in whatever shape or form, they could have easily also raised an objection against Jacob's family moving into Egypt. Now you might think, hey, there's a small shepherd family. What harm can that cause them? However, you have to understand, Egyptians had great pride in their culture and their country. And especially during the famine, where they think that the reserves of food that they have could be possibly shortened by the addition of shepherds with a bunch of their livestock that they have to feed extra. For whatever practical reasons or whatever social reasons, it was easy for them to easily reject Joseph's family's immigration plan. Yet, none of that happened. None of that happened, and the whole immigration process is panning out very smoothly without any huge bumps or obstacles in the way. And friends, I believe we can glean one simple fact from this. Just based on the fact that it's happening so smoothly, I think we can dare say that God was delighted what Joseph was planning. That God delighted in Joseph's plan, and that because he delighted in Joseph's plan, he let the process pan out very smoothly. Now, don't get me wrong, just because something goes smoothly without any issues doesn't necessarily mean that it's something that God approves. But we clearly know that Joseph's plan right now to move his family not into the mainland of Egypt, but into the outskirts of Egypt, was born, was strategized, was crafted out of a concern to keep God's promises above anything else. And I believe God took that planning very preciously. And that is why he's letting out this process pan out very smoothly. And this is just a small segue, but friends, when we tend to think how God is supposed to work in our lives, or God is supposed to do things for us, we always have a tendency to think in terms of miracles, in terms of extreme happenings, in terms of something dramatic fashion, such as a 1 in a billion scenario unfolding before us, such as a bullet that's heading our way being stopped mid-air and dropping to the ground as if it hit an invisible wall. We tend to think of God's intervention only in such terms. And don't get me wrong, God definitely does work such miracles. We hear from testimonies, especially from people who are persecuted every day in different parts of the world. But, friends, I believe this also points to an important fact. God also works and intervenes using everyday instances of our life. And as I was meditating upon Joseph's immigration story, I was also reminded of my own immigration story. Unlike many immigrant families that I've known in California, my immigrant process went rather extremely smoothly. Because here was the reality that I was seeing every day, almost every week. My high school friends, or whether it be the volunteers in our high school department, basically college and up, their prerequisite was always the same for their visa. A number of them have been cheated by their lawyers during their green card application process and had actually lost a fortune, or because they have been delayed their visa and because they trusted in their lawyers and then were betrayed at the last minute, some of them ended up being illegal residents unknowingly, unwillingly for 10 years. And so every day they lived in fear of being discovered and being expelled from the United States, never to return again. However, strangely enough, within 1 year of immigrating into the U.S., and only 2 months before my dad lost his job, God granted our family a green card rather very quickly. Now, there's a little bit of background information behind this, of course, but I will not diverge into it too deeply. But long story short, I was able to live freely within U.S. without any concerns since. And friends, I believe there was God's hand and guidance in that. Because in all honesty, after I got my green card and after I got my U.S. passport, this was the common sentiment that me and my family shared. Why in the world did I do that? Why in the world did I get a U.S. passport? Long story short, because I got a U.S. passport as a male who was 25 years old, my Korean visa got canceled. And I lost the rights to either live, study, or work in Korea until I'm age 41. So I'm here. And unless I go to Korea for travel purposes, I cannot work, live, or study in Korea. And at first, in hindsight, for some reason, and it just happened so smoothly. Even our family, and even my mom, who's usually very sensitive about these things, at the moment didn't think too deeply about it. But only after all that happened, we were both thinking, oh my God, why did I do that? Why didn't I just extend living as a green card resident in U.S., and why in the world did I get a U.S. citizenship? But I believe, again, friends, looking back and now looking back again in more recent times, I think I'm slowly starting to see why God has decided to do that and led us in such an easy immigration process. Because I believe there was God's plan for me to stay in the United States. Because right now, when I look in Korean society, I don't think I would have the courage or the strength or the spirituality to resist the pressures or the temptations that Korean society has recently developed. And that God's purpose for me in staying in the United States has been to basically nurture my spirituality, my conviction, and have a space of learning properly what it means to grow as a minister of the word. And that is, again, a subjective analysis and never therefore conclusive. But one thing, suffice it to say, friends, is that when something pans out very smoothly, especially plans and strategies that you have made for the purpose of serving God, chances are, if they pan out smoothly, there's probably God's plan and God's delight over it. So just something to think about. Now, moving on, again, back to the story. After Pharaoh's encounter with the brothers, the passage now then proceeds to detail a second encounter between Pharaoh and Jacob. And though the details are so lean and simple, there is something odd about this encounter that makes you wonder for a little bit. Let me give you a hint. If you skim through verses 1 through 6 really quickly in our passage today, from 47 verses 1 through 6, if you skim through that passage really quickly, who do you think is in charge and is the one asking the questions? Who do you think is the one basically who is in authority? If you read through verses 1 through 6 really quickly, it's no doubt Pharaoh who is the one in charge. There's absolutely no doubt about that. Now, given the state of power dynamics, what should be happening during Pharaoh's meeting with Jacob as well? Pharaoh should be the one leading the discussions and plans and whatever things that the discussion will have to lead or basically will digress into. But when you read through verses 7 through 10, that short narrative that details the encounter between Jacob and Pharaoh, though Pharaoh may be the one leading the discussion / asking the question, I can't help but notice that Jacob, not Pharaoh, is the one in charge. That Jacob, not Pharaoh, is the one in charge. Now, what do I think that? Let's read verse 7 together. Verse 7 reports as such. Then Joseph brought in Jacob and his father and stood him before Pharaoh, and Jacob blessed Pharaoh. Again, according to this passage, who is blessing who? It's Jacob who is blessing Pharaoh. Let's read verse 10 as well. In verse 10, this is what is happening. After whatever conversations has aspired between them, remember the Bible doesn't focus on giving too much details, just the important details. After however long that conversation they had, as Jacob was leaving Pharaoh, verse 10 reports, and Jacob blessed Pharaoh and went out from the presence of Pharaoh. So according to the passage, as Jacob was coming in, he blessed Pharaoh, and as he left after his conversation, he blessed Pharaoh again. And friends, this is normal. It's not. That is not how a typical greeting or dynamic should be going between an emperor and an old immigrant. Who is the one who should be doing the blessing here? It's Pharaoh. Pharaoh is the one who is normally supposed to bless the demigod and emperor of Egypt, the most powerful ruler among the Asian civilization at that time. He is the one who is supposed to offer his hand in blessing because supposedly he's the one who's supposed to have the power and the authority to bless. I know in modern terms the concept of blessing and for someone to bless is not something that we easily encounter. But we have to realize the reason why, especially in the more conservative / traditional settings, and historically speaking as well, the reason why it was the elders blessing the younger, the reason why it was the king blessing their servants was simple. Because the one who has the power and authority and something to offer were usually the ones blessing their subordinates or their younger ones. And when the younger one or the weaker one were to bless the higher one, it was generally done in a form of praise, not because they had anything to offer. And that's why, friends, this passage, this portion where Jacob is the one blessing Pharaoh is very odd and paradoxical. This isn't just a simple hello and a farewell. If that was the case, they wouldn't dare use the word blessing. However, that is exactly what is happening. Again, Jacob is blessing Pharaoh. A shepherd is blessing Pharaoh. A 130-year-old immigrant is blessing one of the most powerful rulers in the kingdom at that time. How is this happening? Friends, in order to understand the significance of this passage, we have to diverge a little bit and understand the very meaning of blessing, the very word blessing that's actually used within this passage. Once we grasp this meaning, we'll soon understand its weight. The word blessing here in the Hebrew is called barak in Hebrew. And funnily enough, it is where Barack Obama's name actually comes from. It is from this Aramaic/Arabic word barak, which means blessing, in particular in Hebrew. And this word is a very important word throughout Genesis, if you actually think about it. Because throughout Genesis, whenever God blesses his people, he uses this specific word, barak, to bless his people. The first instance appears in Genesis chapter 1, verse 28, my apologies. And this is what it is said in Genesis chapter 1, verse 28, right after God has finished creating all of his creation. Genesis chapter 1, verse 28. And God blessed them, and God said to them, be fruitful and multiply, and fill the earth, and subdue it, and have dominion over the fish of the sea, and over the birds of the heaven, and over every living thing that moves on the earth. So after God created humanity, he blessed it. He baraked it. He baraked it. And it doesn't end there. After God has first established his covenant promises with Abraham, basically the first calling of his people, this is what he says to Abraham. Genesis chapter 12, verses 2-3. This is what it says. And I will make you a great nation, and I will bless you and make your name great, so that you will be a blessing. I will bless those who bless you, and him who dishonors you I will curse, and in you all the families of the earth shall be blessed. From just this short passage alone, you can see how many times the concept blessed appears. After God has made a covenant promise with Abraham and promises that he will become a source of blessing unto the nations, the word blessing, barak, and its derivatives are used over and over and over again. Not only that, it doesn't stop there. Right after Abraham was about to kill Isaac as a sacrifice, God repeats the contents of his blessing from Genesis chapter 12, 15, and 17 that he said he will give to Abraham. And in that instance in Genesis chapter 22, God again, when he reaffirms his blessing to Abraham, he uses the word barak, to bless. To Abraham, who has shown absolute obedience to his word, as God is reaffirming his covenant promise and blessing, the word barak is used once again. And friends, it doesn't stop there. Even in Genesis chapter 25 and 26, when God reaffirms his covenant promises with Abraham's son Isaac, God uses the word barak. But wait, there's more. Even when God is reaffirming what is essentially the same covenant with Isaac's son, Jacob, God uses the word barak once again and says, I will barak you. I will bless you. And you will again enjoy the blessings that I promised to your father Isaac and to your grandfather Abraham. So friends, why is this word important? Why is the word barak important? This word barak describes the type of relationship that God enjoys and establishes with his promised chosen people. I'll say that once again. This word describes the type of relationship that God establishes with his promised and chosen people. Whenever God establishes a relationship with his people, he always uses the word barak, that the relationship itself will be a blessing. And this is where I am now alluding to the introduction that I alluded to earlier. What do you believe the true blessing is? in this context, in the context of this word and of the Bible, is very clear. It is in a relationship with him. And whenever God says that his people will become a blessing unto the world, and that's the second dimension of the definition of Barak, he uses the word Barak. So it's primarily used in two senses. One, in the way that God establishes a relationship with his people. Secondly, in the blessing that his people will become unto the nations. So I know that's a lot of information to process, especially while we're just hearing this in the fly. But as I progress forward, the meaning of this word is a little bit going to be clear, so let me move on. So now coming back to Jacob's story then, now that we briefly explored the meaning of this word, let's now ask the question, why is the fact that Jacob baraked Pharaoh so important? Pastor Daniel, why is it so important that this short verse where Jacob baraked Pharaoh so important? Well, the reason is simple. Because Jacob is finally performing his proper role as God's representative in blessing the world. In short, he's finally doing what he's supposed to do. Blessing the world. And that is why, even though it's such a short and lean passage, that passage is actually extremely significant, the one that we're looking at right now. Remember that the central reason why God chose his people to begin with, especially in this case the people of Israel, was simple, that they may be Barak unto the nations, as God is Barak to his people. Yet in the 130 years that Jacob has lived, he has not yet once either become a Barak to people around him, a blessing unto other people, nor has he baraked, nor has he blessed other people. But now finally, after 130 years, Jacob is finally becoming the blessing, the barak unto the world as he should have. And how in the world did he learn his lesson? He definitely learned that lesson the hard way. If you read at verse 9, he reports this. As Pharaoh asked him how old is he, this is what he says. The days of the years of my sojourning are 130 years. Few and evil have been the days of the years of my life. And I know for some of you who are immediately drawn to the fact that few are his years, you might be thinking, but he lived to be 130 years old. Yes, but compared to his father and grandfather, he definitely did not live as long. That's why he's saying, relatively speaking, few are his days. However, in those few days have truly been evil for Jacob. Because at this moment, let's take a review. Let's remind ourselves of the life that Jacob has led until this point. Jacob was a man who was hungry for blessings. And there is no better word than to describe that. He was hungry for blessings. He was an ambitious one and a talented one at that. And he succeeded in obtaining it. Through his scheming and strategizing and planning, he was able to extract the blessing that he wanted out from his father. And what was the result of receiving that blessing? Number one, alienation and separation from his family members. He had to run away from his brother's murderous intent into Haran, where his uncle he knew was. And he never, as he was leaving the land of Canaan, realized that that will be the last time he will be seeing his mother. After he left the land of Canaan, Jacob was never to see his mother alive again, as he lived and cowered in fear in the land of Haran, away from his brother's murderous intent. He would have never thought that his efforts to obtain blessing with the help of his mom would prevent him from seeing his mother once again for the rest of his life, as long as he was alive. And before Jacob got back, Rebekah, his mother, passed away. Maybe as he was in Haran and as he met the love of his life, Rachel, he might have enjoyed short moments of happiness. But even that happiness that existed for a fleeting moment was destroyed the instant jealousy was stirred among his wives between Rachel and Leah. And not only that, as his uncle Laban was extracting a slaver's worth of wages from Jacob. And as Jacob was groaning under the pressure, he would have lost all sense of happiness that he thought he would obtain by working hard and achieving and enjoying whatever wages that came his way. And even when he decided to go home, it was not an easy journey for him as well at that point. He, on one hand, had to face the wrath of his uncle who didn't want him to leave. And on the other hand, back home was his brother waiting with murderous intent. And then faced with the fear of confronting his brother, remember that Jacob even sought to sacrifice his entire possessions and even family to run away. Remember that within the formation that he has set up, he sent all of his property and his family forward, and he himself was in the back. Why? Because if things were to go to south, he was planning to run away. Yet we remember how God intervened and broke his hip bones. Why? Because he didn't want Jacob to run away from his promises. And he wanted to finally make him trust in God's promises. But if only there was a happy ending there. Jacob's troubles, as we know, don't end there. As he's traveling back to Canaan after reconciling with his brother, his beloved wife Rachel passes away soon while giving birth to Benjamin. And as he settled in the land of Canaan outside of the land of promises, he experienced the tragedy with his daughter Dinah and the subsequent slaughter and thievery that his sons committed in the name of vengeance. This forced him to flee the area out of fear, only again to find God extending his protection over them once again. And until recently, Jacob thought that his beloved son Joseph was torn to death by wild beasts, and he lived with that pain for 22 years. And as again he struggled to survive the famine that came upon his family, again a tragedy, a seeming tragedy has fallen upon him, where he was asked and forced to give up the safety of his last favorite son, Benjamin, for the life of his family and himself. Friends, that is Jacob's life. Few and evil are the days of his life. So friends, how in the world does this life story have anything to do with Pharaoh? Pastor Dan, why are you trying to lead with this? So how did this enable Jacob? How did this life experience enable Jacob to be someone who blesses Pharaoh? Here's my answer. Through his very expensive life lesson, Jacob has finally and truly realized that the true blessings do not lie in mankind's power, in their efforts, in their planning, in their talents, in their wisdom, in their knowledge, in their understanding, in their net worth. Anything that mankind can offer, that's not where the blessing flows from. But that true blessings only lie in God's promises and in God's presence. Remember, Jacob was someone who was desperate to be blessed, and he was someone who unhesitatingly would have sacrificed anything to obtain that blessing. Yet, by God's gracious intervention, time and time again, he has realized deep within his soul that the true blessings do not lie within the grasp of mankind, but in the very presence, existence, and will of God. That the true blessing is not something that he could have grasped with his power, because look at him, how hard he tried. But that blessing was something that God has graciously granted to an undeserving people. And Jacob, at the end of his life, after going through those expensive life lessons, has finally realized this one important factor, that he is but a conduit of blessing and a tool for blessing the world. And the extraction of that, the summary of that, we are seeing in the confession that he makes before Pharaoh. His true humility and insight and his final proper maturity is seen in his confession. Few and evil have been the days of my life. That the true blessings cannot flow from within himself, but always flows from God. And with that perspective, when he sees Pharaoh, who is he seeing? person who is just like him. A person who thinks he has everything in this world, that he can control everything with his power and his culture and the men under his control, but that he himself, without God's blessing, is nothing but mere dust. And that he also is in no position or nothing different than Pharaoh. So that's why Jacob is able to bless and dare bless Pharaoh, a 130-year-old shepherd who has escaped the land of poverty into this land. He is there blessing the ruler who holds it all and saying to him, I bless you. Why? Because the blessing isn't from him, nor does it flow from him, but it flows from God. And even the blessing that even he is to enjoy has to first come from God. And from his life lessons, he realized that good shepherd desires to bless even someone as Pharaoh, who dare declares himself to be God. Because God is such a God who wishes to bless the world. And that's why Jacob blesses Pharaoh and can dare bless Pharaoh humbly but courageously, boldly, with conviction. Jacob has finally become the true blessing that God wanted him to be. So friends, with the context in mind, just one simple meditation. I want us to learn how to redefine our meaning and our search for blessing, for happiness, for joy. How are the people of God to define blessing? Friends, I'm seeing that there is still a lot of culture and atmosphere where our concept of success, where our concept of happiness seems to lie within our careers, within preparing for the future. And maybe some people might throw in, well, it's the people that are important, and well, it's the community that are important, but it doesn't lie deep within our conviction that those things take any priority over the careers or the wealth or the power or the talent or the recognition that we will ever achieve in our lives. And on the other token, relationships are extolled to that higher virtue as well, where we want to and we need to find that significant other in order to make our lives perfectly blessed and happy. And such is a conviction that has unfortunately seeped deep into the church and is unfortunately deeply finding its roots within our sinful hearts. Because our sinful hearts love that type of idea, that these blessings and the happiness that we could ever enjoy can never always be found in our hands and never, ever in God's presence. But friends, as the life story of Jacob testifies, and honestly, as the life story of many humanity testifies, it doesn't lie within our grasp, friends. It doesn't. We can grasp the highest positions, the highest honor. We can grasp the best significant other. We can grasp at the best recognition, whatever it may be. Name your prize. They are not meant to be the highest blessings, nor they will ever be. So friends, how are you living your life and prioritizing your life right now? Where is the majority of your time and your pleasures and your desires wasted towards or spent towards? What do you strive for? What do you live for? Friends, if they are not about God or belonging in God or knowing about God or doing God's will or enjoying His presence, friends, I dare challenge you to change that direction immediately, because that is a cursed road. It is a sinful road. It is a road that is full of sin and treachery and death, that it guises itself as a blessing. So friends, do not fall into that path. But friends, redefine our meaning of blessing, because our truest blessings can only be found in His presence as we belong under His guidance, as we are guided by the Good Shepherd's guidance within our lives. So friends, I again challenge you, be God's people who does live and enjoy this truest blessing that flow from our relationship with God. And don't stop there, but as you enjoy that blessing of God, be the people who gives that blessing of God unto other people. For such is the calling of the people of God and the church of God. So may that blessing and may that truest happiness be a reality in your everyday lives. Let us pray.